Good evening and welcome to 27 Minutes here on WJTS 27. I'm Kurt Gutgsell. The Huntingburg Chamber of Commerce sponsored a luncheon last week with the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. On the mind of Speaker Vince Griffin was the issue of property taxes. When we come back, we will go to that meeting, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Mr. Vince Griffin of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce presented issues facing the 2008 Indiana General Assembly. The discussion centered on how the property tax situation is going to play out at the State House.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vince Griffin with the State Chamber. I'm Vice President of Environmental and Energy Policy. You'll note you didn't hear anything in there about tax and fiscal in my title. Unfortunately, the fellow who was going to come, Cam Carter, handles our economic development and some of the tax issues. Had a family emergency. He was doing a Terre Haute presentation. He had to go back to Indy. I happened to be in New Albany this morning, given an environmental and energy briefing, and so I'm Plan B, if you will. You have on the table a presentation, a slide presentation. I'm going to go through that, and please ask questions, and certainly if I can answer this, I will. If not, Christine has graciously agreed to be kind of my scribe and jot down your name and the question roughly, and we will definitely get an answer back to you. And we were chatting about this, but before we got up here, and that is that the property tax issue down here, while important, hasn't been what appears to be as bombastic as it is in other areas. Indianapolis, as you've probably seen in the press, has been really slammed with huge increases. My taxes personally tripled. My property taxes tripled, which was kind of a shock. And that's something that a lot of folks are dealing with. Mayor Bart Peterson in Indianapolis was unelected because of taxes in one way or the other. So this is a big issue throughout the state. So I go through this, you'll see, because we've done some polling that shows basically what's happening here. Well, I'm going to cover the results of the chamber poll that we did, the basic property tax landscape, what's it looking like throughout Indiana. I'm always interested in hearing how different people in different parts of the state are perceiving this. And then the governor's property tax proposal and what our thinking is on that, because while we agree with a substantial portion of the governor's proposal, we still have some concerns. We'll talk about those. As you see, make sure you have the same slides I'm following with you on. That 90% of the voters in Indiana look at Indiana's property tax situation as a crisis. 56%. And 34% of them see this as an important issue. We do polls every year on various things and specifically on taxes. This is by far and away the highest this has ever been. It's not even close to any other poll we've ever done. Of concern throughout the state relative to property taxes. And voters by a 2-to-1 margin, they agree that property with the same market value should be assessed at the same rate. And that's not happening throughout the state, and I'll explain in a bit why that is. And then there's a great deal of misunderstanding throughout the state where they don't know, the voters don't know where the property tax money's going. 20% believe incorrectly that it's going to state government. It's not at all. And 21% said they just didn't know. So that's almost half the people either think it's going to somewhere it's really not, or they have no idea. I happen to, it's painfully, have in my car still my property tax bill. I don't carry it around with me normally, but I got to tell you that as I was driving over here, I thought, I've got it in there. And in Indianapolis, Marion County, they sent us out a bill initially, and then they sent another bill and said, don't pay that bill. Pay last year's taxes. So I thought, okay, I can do that. I paid last year's taxes. Then they sent us this letter. If I read this to you, you would go, what? This is from Marion County Treasurer. And then they said, okay, now you're going to pay this much, and then later on you're going to pay some more. This is death by 1,000 cuts. But what I wanted to show you is, yeah, that's like your kid saying, can I have $1? And then a half hour later come back, come another $1, you know. Pretty soon you start adding this up. This is getting expensive. What I did was I saved this for you, because what this graphically shows, I know you can't all see it back there, this gray area here, this is where the taxes go in Marion County, which I imagine is not unlike what happens right here. Schools, 46% of the property taxes go to schools, and 33% go to welfare. Now, I'm not a smart man, as Forrest Gump would say, but that is what? 79%, almost 80% of the property taxes go to places that you really can't do much to change at this point. And to think that it's the state government people that are doing it is wrong. And I think there's a sliver in here that shows state, and it's like 0.1% or something like that. And it's a Department of Natural Resources program, ironically, that the property taxes go to state dollars. So it's rather interesting that voters don't understand or don't know. Next slide is that 38% of the voters believe, this is all our poll findings, that the General Assembly should do something about this. 16% that the governor should solve it. This is an entity that doesn't get the property tax money, should fix it. You know, that's really kind of scary in a way. Voters want the government to control spending, and this is something I think that you're hearing throughout the state. I don't know how it played in the election here recently, but control runaway spending in some cases. 76% want local government to be, quote, overhauled. And this is going to be interesting to see how this happens as we move through this. Majority say that the nonprofits, excluding churches, should pay fees in lieu of property taxes. And if you heard, and you may have seen some of what the governor's proposed, but 2 days ago now, Senator Luke Kenley, who chairs the Finance Committee, came out with his proposal. His is very similar to the governor's, but something that he is peppering the pot with. I don't know if there's folks in here who deal in services, but he's looking hard at services. Services are not taxed at this time, such as barbers, attorneys, doctors, you know, anybody, car maintenance. All those services at this time don't pay a sales tax. And I forget what that number is, but it's you can imagine, it's a massive number if that just completely were taxed. So I happened to hear Kenley, as I was on the road yesterday, on the radio saying, I'm not quite sure where we're going to go with this, which probably gets everybody really nervous. You know, which cat are we going to catch, you know? And so that gets them all nervous, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes?
In other states, are those services taxed?
Some are, but what I could do, Nancy, is get for you maybe even a listing of that. I'm sure Senator Kenley has a listing. This guy does his homework really well. He's a Harvard-educated attorney, and he is really sharp, and he is tracking this close. So I assure you that he's looked at what other states are doing. You know, and Vince, in his simplistic look at this property tax thing, you got to figure what we're going to do, and that's about a lot of what this is saying is look at those states around us and just try to hit at or just below where they are as to what we want to do, and I think that's what you'll see. Nearly all, that's 99.9% of all the property tax monies goes to local government. That 1/10%, and I've got to find out, maybe Ray, do you know? It goes to a natural resources program, Save the Chipmunk or something, that at some point was being, are you showing this on the air? I need to know. Because I love chipmunks, let me tell you. Cats, I'm really on the fence, no pun intended, but chipmunks are pretty okay for the chipmunk lobby. Schools, and as I showed you, schools account for over half of the total. So that, and you have to ask yourself, and there's a thing in here in the governor's proposal about what should be done with school. And so who pays what? Indiana's among the top third of the states for businesses paying property taxes. We're in the top third, whereas homeowners' percentage of property tax ranks near the bottom third. Now, we're trying to get that balanced out. And it's kind of a real catch-22. You know, if you have higher taxes for business, jobs don't come here. But if you have higher taxes for property, people don't want to live here. You know, so what you need to do is find, and that's what they're going to try to do in the General Assembly, is find a proper mix. The business property, now this is so important. I'll probably say this twice. Business property represents only 37% of Indiana's total property assessments. Homeowners represent 63%, but business pays 50% of all property taxes. That's because of all of the homestead credits and the property tax credits that we get. And there's another slide on this in just a second. 37%, 63%, but we pay 50% as business and industry in the state. So that's a real important point. Business personal property tax burdens on machinery and equipment are in the top 10 in the country. So we are paying a substantial fair share of this. The next slide then, property tax reductions. This is the governor's plan. This is what Governor Daniels has proposed. The state should take over all K through 12 school operating levies. That the state should take over all child welfare levies and school transportation operating levies. And our reaction to this is we support this. This is a fair way to do it. The state's doing this anyway. Then we should handle this. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. On structural changes, and this brings, is there a township assessor in here? Okay. Gotta be careful because there are 1,100 assessors, elected assessors in the state of Indiana. Indiana has the most elected officials of any state in the nation because we have 1,100 township assessors that are elected. And you vote for them. Because you didn't know that. When you vote, you're voting for township assessors. Townships, not to be too casual about it, were set up many, many years ago when we essentially rode a horse to do our government business and then rode back. Well, folks, things have changed. We have 1,100 townships in Indiana. Should we continue to have 1,100 townships with all these people? County assessors are appointed by county council, so you have somebody that there is a level of control there, so it's not just somebody willy-nilly somebody's picking, that you elect those county council people. And the governor says assessors, now here's a concept, assessors must be fully trained before they start assessing. Before you do CPR, we're going to train you. You think that would be a good idea? Or why don't you just go out there and wing it, and we'll let you know when it works out. In this case, assessors should be trained before they do it. And you may think, well, Vince, what's that all about? Well, there's no training required. You just elect them. You just select them, and that's it. Expand the authority of local tax control boards for total responsibility and oversight over all of the taxing districts. So in other words, there's accountability in this, and we support this as well. The property tax control growth, some of the governor's plan is to revise current growth quotient formulas from state-based to county-based, so that you get a much more fair way of determining what that formula should be. Referendum for capital projects above a certain size. This is probably the issue that has received most attention. Has it received attention down here? I'm not sure. For you to actually vote, have a referendum on whether or not capital projects above a certain size. I'm not sure what size that is. I don't know if anybody in here has been following this closer than me, but I'm not even sure if the governor has identified that size yet. But above a certain size, have a referendum vote. I know for a fact that north of Indianapolis in Carmel, which is a pretty expensive type community, they were building this school that was going to have an aqua park and have a multimedia facility for filmmaking, and a lot of high-end stuff in the school. And finally somebody said, wait a minute, we're educating kids, we need to be careful what we do with this money. This is now going, if this passes, we'll give you the opportunity to actually say yay or nay on what the school is going to do with your money or any capital projects in the area. A couple years ago when we were traveling around doing legislative previews, I came back to the office, we were having a staff meeting, I says, has anybody noticed that every community is building a new library? Did you build a new library in this area recently? Well, there we go. Now we're there. But these are not expensive, these are not inexpensive facilities. And yeah, we need libraries and, but I was in Fort Wayne actually, and they have built a huge library there. Have you been through Indianapolis lately to see this thing they're building in downtown Indianapolis? It looks like the Death Star ship getting ready to swallow the old library. It's amazing. Next time you're in Indianapolis, go up on Meridian, was about 300 north. This thing is massive. It doesn't look like a great big monster getting ready to swallow a pretty sizable central library building. And the cost overruns are incredible. Just incredible. So we support the referendum and the formula system. Next item is a 1 cent added to the state sales tax effective next year, April Fool's Day. How ironic. And what that will do is raise $928 million in 2009. And businesses pay $275 million, that 928. People don't think about that. They think, well, I'm paying that. It's me personally. But businesses pay a lot of sales tax as well, in your operations. So that's going to be a hit on business.
How's our sales tax compared to like Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, about that?
This will be, depending on, like up near Chicago. Chicago has an extra 1.5% tax for the city of Chicago. Chicago is like close to 10% now, I think.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's like 9-10% area. This will be very close or slightly above other states. What's Kentucky? Do you know? I think they're 6%.
There's 6, but it's on certain items. They don't have it on cigarettes and gasoline.
Huh.
Forgive me, I'm not positive about cigarettes. I'm just competing against them on gasoline. So
That's interesting.
they don't have it on gas.
They'll figure that out.
That's a problem for the guys competing against them on the borders.
Sure.
Right now.
And that's the concern here. We don't want, we don't want the border areas, including here,
Especially as the price raises.
to have people going across the state line to conduct their business, and that's a very heavy concern. So I would advise you to tell your legislators to keep that in mind as we try to work through this. Unlike the homeowners, though, there's no property tax relief for businesses, and that's one thing I talked about before. With us paying well over half of the property taxes, we don't have relief as businesses. And so with the sales tax increase and with the no relief on property taxes, it's a double hit on business. And this is the area that we have a concern with. Unfortunately, when we had our release reacting to the governor's plan, it's like a football field. We agreed from 0 all the way down here to about the 5-yard line. But no offense against fine folks in the media, they wanted to talk about the last 5 yards. They wanted to talk about, the fact that we had concerns that we're going to get a double hit for business and industry. Okay? For those higher price items with the sales tax, that, like we said, that may influence buyers and those in the border areas around the state, and you can go across the state. The concern too is Indiana's sales tax will become higher than the surrounding states, as we talked about. And Christine, if you'll help me remember, we'll get those figures to you, and that should be very easy to pull up. And then in an election year, legislators are very hesitant to vote for a tax increase. Last week, seems hard to believe the election was last week, seems like a long time ago now, when we had the municipal elections, 38% of the state's incumbent mayors were unelected. That's huge. 38% were unelected of the incumbents were unelected. And that's just incredible. So I assure you that folks in the State House that want to remain in the State House, and a lot of those are leaving now, announcing they're not going to run again, it's going to be very difficult for them to do this and carry that back home, because that their opponents are going to slam them with that come election time. So under the governor's plan, it would use some of the revenue from state surplus, and we're concerned a bit about this because, how far do you deflate that tire before you're running on the rims? And you've got to be real careful with this. The state reserves are not where they need to be. 10 to 12% of the state's annual budget should be kept in surplus, and right now we're just under 8%. So, there's not enough air in the tire, in our opinion, to maintain that surplus. And if we have an economic downturn, then that's going to exacerbate that whole condition, because that surplus is even going to become more weakened. The governor's proposing a new homestead exemption, and kind of we'll walk through this formula. What it will do is add an additional 35% homestead exemption on top of the current $45,000 homestead exemption. So simply, if you have a $100,000 house, immediately you get a $45,000 reduction, so you're down to $55,000 as the assessed value. Then the additional thing that the governor's looking at is a 35% reduction of that $55,000, which means now you have an almost $20,000 additional exemption. What that then means is that your $100,000 home is now taxed as if it's about $35,000. Now, as a homeowner, I'm saying, okay, but then again, when you start messing with that scale, it starts shifting stuff around. As it says here, 64% of the home's tax bill will be wiped out and shifted to somewhere else. Well, on a pretty small playing field, there aren't too many other places to go. It's business, and that concerns us. And that's why we're here. That's why we're here as the state chamber, to say this concerns us and its impact on business. If this tax shift occurs, businesses will be forced to consolidate our workforce and pass the increase on to consumers. I mean, that's the way it works. Hank and his business, you just don't swallow the extra charges. It has to go into the product that's going out the door. And then it comes to almost like a chicken-egg thing. Which comes first, the job or the house? If you don't have the jobs, there's nobody to buy the house. And then the houses are gone.
And then the other problem is we just don't compete on a national level now, we're competing internationally. And so how do you compete with China and India and all
Exactly.
those other places?
This is becoming more and more and more of an issue.
So that's why you shut them down. You shut them down, you shift it over there. Then the industry goes away.
Exactly. And then we get into my environmental discussion, and what you're doing is shifting the environmental burden to another country. You shift it over to China, they're not quite the same environmental controls that we have in this country.
Not close.
And so that's a big issue. Still with the governor's property tax plan, the circuit breakers, and we have concern with this too. There's a provision to the state constitution for a classified circuit breaker of tax caps, and this is what the governor's proposing: 1% for homesteads. That means your primary residence, 2% for rental properties, and that's probably just from having kids that live in rental properties. We don't want them coming back home, folks. You need to understand this is basic stuff here. Because if their rent goes up too much, they will come back. And so the dilemma here is that rental property isn't protected by these exemptions. In this case, it'll have a 2% cap, but all of that has to be passed on to the renter. And those are the people, theoretically, that can least afford the increase. That's going to be part of the issue. But then 3% on all of their properties, meaning businesses, farms, utilities, and that all comes back on us as business. So our concern is that is it really fair to have business with a 3% cap and homesteads with a 1% cap? We're just saying we just need to be careful about this, and some folks are questioning if this is even constitutional, because the Constitution says that, I think even says here, that it has to be a fair assessment. So this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out as well. Here it is. That the Founding Fathers got it right for a uniform and equal property assessment and taxation. That's in our state constitution. Uniform and equal property assessments and taxation. So if one's 1%, one's 2%, one's 3%, is that uniform and equal? It sounds like a court call to me, but that should take a while. In a chamber poll, there was a 2-to-1 majority that agreed that different properties of same value in the same taxing district should be taxed the same. I know that sounds just so obvious, but that's not the way it's done right now. It's all over the place. Then the Equal Protection Clause in our Constitution also says we need to be fair and we need to be equitable about this. So there are some concerns. But having said all that, overall, the governor's plan is comprehensive. It looks at a lot of the major issues that we have had in our tax system for decades, and we, the state chamber, have been beating the drum on this. We need to fix this. As the timely distribution allows for proper in-depth and examination. It's not uncommon for huge pieces of legislation like this to come out, 3 weeks before the end of session. It's like one of these cheap movies where this just in, we have a new clue. But this is out now. They've been having hearings on these sorts of things. The governor and the state legislative body has said pretty clearly that after Organization Day next Tuesday, they'll start having hearings in December. So they're going to ramp it up and they're going to move it hard. We need to see the numbers on how all these elements are going to impact each other. We've not seen all these numbers. I mean, this is still wet clay stuff. We need to take a hard look at what are these numbers going to mean, how do we compare to other states, how much business is going to be pushed beyond the borders. We need to be careful how we walk this. There are just a few other items here because this is a short session. And for some in the room, you might remember that back in the 60s, Indiana only had a session every other year. And that was the budget session. And then a legislator, we need to find out who this was, by the way. A legislator came up with the bright idea, hey, we need to have an intervening year when we're not meeting. We need to have a short session to conduct important, critical state business. Not the budget, but important critical state business, and that's when we move to what we now call the short session that occurs in the even years. It will start January 7th and it will end by statute March 14th. It's a short period of time to get a lot of important stuff like this done. Legislators this year will be limited in the Senate to 10 bills, in the House to 5 bills. But if you do the math in your head, that's 1,000 bills. And they will submit 1,000 bills, or close to that. And so there's going to be a lot of other stuff going on, not just property taxes. For instance, in the area of education, workforce development, the operating funds will likely move to the state. Spending controls that are out there will have a large impact on school construction. I don't know if you're in the middle of a school construction project or looking at one, but this is going to be absolutely critical. There will be control boards to force schools to bargain with those other elements out there vying for the same dollar. This is going to be interesting, isn't it? There will be controls on construction that's out there, and the school district consolidation will be on the horizon. I think it's Florida that has, as big as that state is, has just a very few number of school districts. In Indiana, we have a lot of school districts, and a lot of the money that goes into the schools is for administration. Is there a better way to do this? We're not saying we figured this out, but is there a better way?
We will hear more from Griffin from the Huntingburg Chamber meeting on future episodes of 27 Minutes. That'll wrap up this edition of 27 Minutes here on WJTS 27. For the entire crew, I'm Kurt Gutgsell. Have a great night.